Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So this is part 4 of the soda can packaging design series. Today we'll be working on the rest of the front packaging. If you haven't watched parts 1 to 3, you can watch it on my channel. This is going to be a long in-depth tutorial, but I will upload a shorter version of the entire process once I'm done editing all the parts. And with that being said, let's get into the video. So we're gonna make a slight change to the logo. So instead of this dot on the exclamation mark, I want to turn it into a blueberry so that the logo becomes more interesting. So first I'm going to select this blueberry by double clicking on our illustration, selecting the blueberry and clicking Ctrl C to copy it. Then I'll double click on our logo to go into our group, and then I'll double click on the exclamation mark once again so we enter this shape. And now I'm going to delete the bottom square, but before I do that, I'm going to drag a guide from above and align it to the bottom of the exclamation mark so we know where to place our blueberry. Then I'm going to click Ctrl V to paste our blueberry. So there's a slight problem that occurs when we do that. So if you notice, this exclamation mark is a compound shape. So that means that both of these shapes, the top of the exclamation mark and the bottom, they are one single shape. And if you change the properties or add a new shape into this group, all the properties of the shapes will be the same. So for example, if I try to change the color of the blueberry, the color of the exclamation mark also changes. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is we need to exit out of the compound path, but before that we will delete the bottom half of the exclamation mark, and then we exit out of the compound path into the group of the logo. And now if we paste our blueberry, you will see that it retains the original color, and we can even change the color of this without it affecting the other parts of the logo. So I'm going to give the same color as the fill of the logo to the blueberry, and then to the top part I'm going to select the background color. I'm also going to rotate it a little bit. Now I want to align the blueberry to the exclamation mark so I know that it's completely centered. So if I select both the objects and use the exclamation mark as the key object and try to align it, you will see that the blueberry disappears. So the reason this is happening is because we forgot to delete the guide that was inside our compound path. So remember, we set up a guide before for a blueberry. We need to delete it because Illustrator thinks the guide is also part of the compound shape. So go into your compound shape, select the guide, delete it, and then try to align the blueberry with the exclamation mark, and it will work just fine. Now I'm going to explain a little bit more about compound paths and clipping masks because these are two very important tools that you will be using a lot. So let me explain it a little more. So let's start with drawing two shapes. So I have a shape here with a solid color and another bigger shape with a gradient. Now I'm going to bring my solid shape to the front by clicking Ctrl Shift right square bracket on my keyboard. And now if I select both the objects and click Ctrl 7 on my keyboard, you can see that the gradient has been masked by the shape that was on top. Think of it like a window. The solid square that we had is the window through which you can see the object on the bottom. So if you double click into that object, you can either change the shape of your window or you can adjust the bottom shape to get a different part of the gradient to be visible. So this is how a clipping mask works. So if there is any unnecessary element of a design that you don't want, you can use the clipping mask to hide it. Now you can remove the clipping mask by right clicking on your shape and clicking Release Clipping Mask. Now when you do this, the solid shape will not have a color anymore. It won't have a fill or a stroke, but it will still be on your artboard. So if you don't need that, you need to select it and delete it. Okay, so moving on to compound paths. So if I want to create a clipping mask to a more complex shape, for example, if I have these 4 squares right here and I want the gradient to show through all 4 of these squares, If I try to select all of these objects and click Ctrl 7 on my keyboard, you can see that the gradient only shows through one and not all 4 of the squares like we wanted it to. Let's try a different method. I'm going to undo it and select the 4 squares and group them together, and then I'm going to try and create a clipping mask again, but now you can see that the gradient has completely disappeared and it is not showing through. So in cases like this, what you can do is you can select your 4 squares and click Ctrl 8 on your keyboard, or right click and click on make compound path, and what this does is that it makes all those shapes into one single object. But now if you try and create a clipping mask with this shape, it works. You can even double click and adjust the position of the squares to create a different kind of shape. When you have disjointed objects which are not connected by any common path, you cannot use the shape builder or the pathfinder tool to make those shapes into a single object, and that is where the compound path option comes into handy. Now we're going to create this part of the front label. So in order to create it, go to your rectangle tool, and first I'm going to give it a blue fill using the eyedropper tool, and then I'm going to drag out a thin long rectangle like this. Now I'm going to round all the corners by using the direct selection tool and dragging the corners in. So now I have a rounded rectangle. Now I'm going to hold Alt and drag a shape to the right so it will duplicate the shape that we've already created, and I'm also holding Shift so that the shape doesn't move up and down and it only moves to the right. Now you need to make sure not to click anywhere on the outside of your artboard. With this shape selected, you're going to click Ctrl D on your keyboard, and what this does is it repeats the action that you performed previously. So in this case, it has duplicated the object once more, and if I keep clicking Ctrl D, I can create a lot of copies of this shape. I have created 7 copies here, and now I'm going to select all of these copies, go to my shape builder tool, and then drag across all of them to join it into one shape. Now I want to round the corners of this shape. I don't want this sharp corner right here. So if I try to use the direct selection tool right now, it's not going to work because it's selecting all the corners, even the inner corners, and those are already rounded. So what you need to do is click and then shift click on all the corners that you want to select, and then drag them upwards so that only those ones are curved. Now if you think the transition is a little harsh, you can right click and use the smooth tool to smoothen it out a little bit. Then you can adjust the size of the shape and center align it to the other 2 elements. Now we're going to make sure that all 3 elements have equal space between them. So we're going to distribute the spacing between these 3 objects. So I'm going to open up my align panel, and with all 3 objects selected, I'm going to go to distribute spacing and click vertical distribute space, and this will distribute our space evenly. But if you look at this, it doesn't look like it has been aligned properly because our logo is a weird curved shape and it does not fit inside the rectangle bounding box properly. The curved baseline makes it hard to align things because the bounding box doesn't go up to the smallest letters. So here's a hack you can use. Basically draw a rectangle onto your logo, and I'm going to align it with the A and P of the logo because those are the letters that are at the center of this logo shape. And then instead of distributing the space between the logo and the other 2 objects, I'm going to select the rectangle, the illustration, and the shape that we created at the bottom, and now I'm going to distribute the space between them. This way you get a much better result, and the spacing between these 2 points and these 2 points are more evenly distributed. Okay, now let's add some text to this bottom section. So I'm going to go to my text tool, which is this T button, and I will click on that and click once on my shape to add the text, and I will write down Blueberry Blast, which is the flavor name, and I'll also write the size, which is 12 fluid ounces or 330 ml. And now I'm going to give it a different font. The font that I've used here is called Freud. Now I'm going to select both of these text elements and give them the same color as the background. I'm also going to adjust the size a little bit so that the flavor name is slightly larger than the size. The letters also look like they're too close to each other, so I'm going to select our text and change the tracking. I will give it the tracking of maybe 75, and that looks much better. While deciding the size of the text, I want to keep in mind the hierarchy of the elements on this packaging. So the very first thing that brands want customers to remember is the brand name. That's why the logo is a much larger size. And the next thing that people look at is the flavor name. And people don't really notice the size of the can. So that's why the size of the can has the smallest size here. We also need to adjust the spacing a little bit. If you take a look at this mock-up, when you wrap the packaging around the can, if the can is bent like this, you don't want any of the text or the packaging to be placed in the top and bottom sections of the can, because that will make it really difficult to read. So make sure to leave some extra spacing at the top and bottom of your packaging so that no text is compromised once the packaging is put on a can. So I'm just going to adjust the sizes of my elements a little bit so that there is more space at the top and the bottom. So I'm going to use the guides that we set up earlier and make sure that no text goes in that space. Now another way to establish text hierarchy is through color, and the way I'm going to do this is I'll change the color of the bottom text to a slightly bluish shade. So this makes it look like the bottom text is kind of fading into the blue background, and the flavor name stands out because it has a yellowish tint to it. So this is just another subtle way to make things clearer in terms of hierarchy.